And lastly is this path. This is the invoice path. This shows a different kind of source. We've had user sources, we've had file sources, now we have an email source. So this, we're going to tell Capture to monitor an email inbox. And it will do that. And as it finds every email, it will pull off the attachment and pass that through the process. In the if you're familiar with on-premise capture, then you know that on-premise capture provided for lots of scripting options in all kinds of places in the product, which made it very flexible. In the cloud environment, it's hard for us to run other people's scripting in our environment and make sure that it doesn't do anything nasty. So we decided to simply remove the scripting feature from Capture on the cloud version and provide the mechanism through an external callout, which means if you want to do something out of the ordinary that Capture can't do, you will use this concept of an external processor to call out from Capture and go to you, do your work, and come back and let it go on its way. So all these other mechanisms of Capture are all in place. You can leverage all those and just have your customization here. We've built one of these specifically for WFR. This is the WebCenter Forms Recognition tool. It can be used to extract data from invoices or a variety of other document types. So we're going to send our document to the agent. The agent's going to interact with WFR and send the data back. This is in this environment, the WFR product only runs on Windows. So we installed the agent here on the Windows box. Again, this corporate firewall comes into consideration. This external processor can be configured to push the data to here, most efficient means, but it means opening holes in firewalls and setting up security. It's complicated. You can also run the external processor in pull mode, which means this agent is configured to pull by polling for entries to see if there are any sitting there and process them and then update them on the way back. We'll show the pull model in this case. So here's my email inbox. You can see I have an invoice sitting there. There's the invoice attached to it, etc. On the Capture side, I created a new procedure for this. We're going to have some metadata fields about the invoice that we're going to pull off of the invoice through the WFR mechanism. And then on the Capture side, I have an email import. I also have a client, like we've seen every time, where I go in and show it from a client perspective. But this is the primary source of inbound data, is the email import. We'll go look at that. If you're familiar with Capture, you connect to the email inbox. What's unique about the cloud and recently is that we've added support for, we've always had standard IMAP email server support. We've had Microsoft email Exchange web services, but only with basic authentication. We've recently added 2 forms of OAuth and then added Google Mail as another email service that we natively talk to, and it has both basic and OAuth as well. In this case, we're using Exchange, we're using basic auth. Here is my user inbox. When I hit plus, I provide the password to this account. And here's the link to Office 365. As documents come out of here, we are going to send them to the external processor, which is that block to send it out for processing. Our processing section. External processors at the bottom here. And what we're going to do is we're going to let the default document type, I didn't create a special one for this, flow through. And we're going to expect the processor to pull from Capture. As I mentioned, this is the pull model. And so in this side, there's not much to configure. This ID is important because this is how this thing can talk back and get stuff from there, from that specific step in the flow. I could have an external processor over here as well. If I wanted to, perhaps instead of transforming into HTML, I want to do something much more fancy. I could have one over here. So we need a way to identify different places in the flow. Okay, so that's the procedure step ID. To make all this work, we added a new set of REST APIs in Capture so that you can monitor what's happening. These are the steps, get documents from a processing step. Once you have it, you can do a variety of things to the document. You can update the document. You could have a processor that despeckles a bad scan. And so it will literally replace the document with a nice cleaner one, or you can update the metadata, et cetera. You've seen some work with attachments. This is also available. So you can create new attachments on that document as well as part of your external processor. There's a section in the development guide about building external processors and some samples that show 3 examples of 2 pulls and a push environment where you can build them and run them and should provide good quick starts. Okay, so it's going to come out in November. So this line here will be duplicated and there'll be an Oracle WebCenter Forms Recognition import agent line here that will let you download the agent. You download the agent, it's an MSI file, you install it on your Windows box. We're talking about this process right here. And then you start it up. And it provides settings and allows you to configure various aspects. One aspect is just some very high level stuff about how does that agent talk to capture, just generically, and how does it talk to WFR? Some high level things that aren't project specific. And then you can have specific integrations. This is my supplier invoice processing, and that's my step ID that I mentioned earlier. That's what we're going to monitor. There's another one on this system as well that is also an example for invoices, it turns out, but it's a different step ID. This agent can monitor both and manage both and run them both through WFR and keep them separate. So you could be doing invoice processing with WFR as well as contract data extraction with WFR if you wanted to. If I modify this, I can set up a bunch of items about it. I give it a name, I define the step, the credentials I'm going to use to talk to capture to get the data. This is that same IDCS application concept that we needed for the file agent to be able to use the API. And then this is what's called an import group. It's part of WFR. It's where we're going to put these invoices to be processed. This is where they come out when they're done, and we're going to monitor that and pick it up. This agent is specific to WFR. You could build an agent to do whatever you want to do. You probably would have some similar configurations, et cetera. We're going to send the data back. So when WFR runs, it generates an XML file. And that XML file has in it a variety of invoice values. It has the vendor's name and his ID and the date and the invoice amount and all the line items, et cetera. So we're going to ask that the agent convert that XML file into JSON and send it back to us. I could also attach it as a file instead of as a field. We're going to do it as a field down here. And then you can upload an example XML file of the output from WFR. This is my WFR XML template. And once you do that, then the XPaths are, when you modify this, you get drop downs to pick the fields in the XPath. And these are the fields from capture. You save that, and then it runs, and we see invoices flowing through. Now, we did this setup a week ago, and all the successful ones have already been through, and they're gone. But we left some in a waiting state, and they timed out because we let them wait so long, so we could show the next phase. But so, pardon the failure, but there are a bunch of successes that have come and already been removed from the list because they succeeded, and we only keep the successes for a day. We keep the failures longer in case you need to do research. Okay, so there's a status display. Embarrassingly, the password for this system has expired, and so I had to go find a picture for it. But if you're familiar with WFR, it has this thing called the web verifier, or the verifier. And the verifier lets you look at, it shows you the metadata that it's found successfully off of the invoice, and then you can fix it. And when you fix it, it helps train it, and it gets smarter. And then you release this, and when you're done, WFR exports the XML output, and it goes back through the flow. So that's what's happening in this box right here. Okay. The commit step in capture is basically the same as the ones I've shown you already. It's working with invoice objects, and it's committing data into OCM. And we actually have a green arrow here to the supplier as well. Okay, so I jump over to the supplier side. Here's an invoice. And if I open the invoice, we'll see that I only provided a couple of metadata values here, but this is that that JSON data blob that came back. It's kind of hard to read in there. So I've taken it out and just pasted it here. But here you can see all the individual line items that are found in the data that was extracted from the thing. And then here's what we call the header items, right? The items that only appear once on the invoice. So that shows this flow.